Hey everyone, tonight we're going missing. It's 4:17 a.m. and the sound of rain tapping against the window has become its own kind of lullaby. I'm sitting here curled under a blanket that still smells faintly of Earl Grey and old wood, holding a photograph I've held too many times to count. The date on the back says September 28th, 1996. The faces are still young, frozen, smiling in ignorance. That day, a class of children, 15 of them, left on a school field trip and were never seen again. Among them was my daughter Rory. She had this habit of scrunching up her nose when she didn't want to do something, and I remember that morning she did it when I tried to braid her hair. I still don't know why that detail stayed with me when so many others have slipped away. You might not survive this story, not because it's filled with monsters, at least not the kind that growl or lurk under beds, but because of how real it is, how slow and cruel time can be when you're waiting for answers. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And hey, before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It always fascinates me how we can be scattered across time zones, but somehow still end up here together in the dark. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. That morning, I woke up knowing what day it was before my eyes had even opened. You know how some dates carve themselves into your bones, like your body knows grief better than your calendar does? 27 years to the day. The clouds hung low like damp cotton. I made tea like I always do, lavender and Earl Grey. Rory's favorite, though she only liked the smell. Never drank it, said it tasted like flowers were having an identity crisis. I smiled at the thought, but it turned into a sigh before it could reach my eyes. I still had the text from Helen on my phone, "Come over anytime. We can be sad together." Helen had lost her daughter Sally in the same disappearance. If grief was a language, Helen and I were fluent. We didn't need to explain ourselves anymore. That's the odd comfort of long-term mourning. You become experts at navigating rooms no one else dares to enter. Before leaving the house, I packed a small tin of cookies. I don't know why. Maybe it's habit. Maybe I just didn't want to show up empty-handed to sadness. The walk to Helen's was quiet. The town hadn't changed much since the 90s. Some new paint here, a few fences replaced, but most of it looked stubbornly the same, as if the buildings had frozen too, waiting for their children to come back. Helen's front door was already open when I reached the porch. That's another thing about grief. You don't knock anymore. You just show up. She smiled in that worn, tired way we do now. We didn't talk much at first, just brewed tea and sat with the weight of the day. Sometimes I wonder, I said, if all the therapy just taught me how to carry the grief instead of letting it go. Helen nodded, placing a lemon wedge on the rim of her cup like it might make the bitterness less metaphorical. Maybe we're not meant to let go, just learn how to balance it better. Now here's your quirky fact for this part. Did you know that elephants revisit the bones of their dead and even appear to mourn? They don't forget. Neither do we. The silence was comfortable until I saw it. The photograph. A class photo I'd never seen before. Rory stood beside the school bus, beaming in her uniform, her hand holding Sally's. A few other kids were there too, most of them familiar. But what stood out wasn't them. It was someone standing at the edge. A woman. Not the teacher, not a parent. I leaned in. "Helen," I said slowly, "why is Principal Lillian in this photo?" Helen frowned, then shrugged. "I thought Gregory was the only staff on that trip." So did I. She sipped her tea a little too quickly. It was probably taken before they left. Maybe. But something about the expression on the principal's face stuck with me. Not joy, not pride, not even the usual say cheese stiffness. It was expectant, watchful, like she was making sure something happened. Aging does something funny to your memory. We think it sharpens over time like a good cheese, but really it softens. Molds. Things get fuzzy at the edges. Maybe that's what trauma does. It smudges the details until only the emotion remains. But this felt clear. That night I went home with the photo. Helen didn't mind. "Just don't go back down the rabbit hole," she warned. And I nodded, like I always do. But the rabbit hole had teeth this time, and a name. Principal Lillian Brooks. The photo sat on my kitchen table like it was daring me to look away. But I couldn't. Every few minutes, I found myself drawn back to it, tilting it toward the light, zooming in on faces I already knew by heart. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a gnawing unease. The way Principal Brooks stood slightly apart from the group, half in the frame, half out, as if she wasn't meant to be in the photo at all. I kept replaying her expression. Not a smile, not really. Something between nervous and calculating. Or maybe I was projecting. That's the academic debate of the day, confirmation bias versus selective memory. Are we seeing what's really there? Or what we desperately want to find? I told myself it didn't matter. Then I picked up my coat and left the house anyway. The cemetery was just 6 blocks away, and it had started to drizzle. Not a storm, just enough rain to make everything smell like petrichor and regret. You know that scent that feels like it's coming from beneath the earth, not above it. I brought Rory's favorite tulips, purple and yellow. The florist always saved them for me this time of year. I think she knew. Rory's headstone was just where I left it last year. Clean, simple, no dates under her name, just forever loved. It still felt wrong to see her name on stone instead of in a yearbook. I knelt down, brushing away a few soggy leaves, and set the flowers gently at the base. "Hi, baby," I whispered. "It's Mom." I brought the photo. I pulled it from my coat pocket and rested it beside the flowers. And that's when I saw her. A woman standing maybe 50 feet away. Same age range as Rory would have been, mid-30s. Windbreaker zipped to her chin. Her hair was pulled back, but I couldn't see her face clearly. She wasn't visiting any grave, just standing still as stone facing the section where the other students had been laid to rest. I'm not proud of what I did next. I watched her for too long. But something about her posture, the way her arms wrapped around herself like she was holding in more than just warmth, it unsettled me. Eventually she noticed me staring. Our eyes met. She turned away immediately and walked briskly out of the cemetery, disappearing around the hedge-lined gate. I should have let it go. I should have just stayed with Rory, but I didn't. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my knees, and followed her. She was fast. Not running, but definitely not meandering. I trailed her down 2 blocks, then across the park with the broken swing set, past the diner that still sold lemon pie with too much meringue, and into a neighborhood I hadn't visited since the search parties ended. Then she vanished. One minute she was there, the next gone. A side street, a backyard gate, I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I was now standing alone in a part of town that felt more ghost than neighborhood. I sighed and turned back. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe I was looking too hard. Maybe seeing Lillian in that photo had stirred up something old, something raw. Grief is strange like that. You think it's dormant, buried beneath the time and distractions. Then it taps you on the shoulder with a memory and asks, "Were you really done?" Here's your quirky fact. The human nose can detect over 1 trillion scents, but grief only smells like one thing: old clothes in a sealed box, and rain. Back at home, I set the photo down again. But this time I scanned it with my phone and zoomed in digitally. That's when I noticed the detail. In the far background, almost out of frame, was the same woman I'd just seen. She was leaning against the side of the school bus, just barely visible, but unmistakable. Same stance, same shape. A small beauty mark on her chin that hadn't changed in 27 years. It wasn't just that she looked like someone familiar. It was that she was familiar. But that couldn't be. That girl, Audrey Whitman, was on the missing list. Same class as Rory, declared dead in absentia. My hands started to shake because suddenly the impossibility of it all didn't feel so impossible. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just a look-alike. But maybe someone had survived. And if Audrey Whitman had survived, what else had we all missed? I didn't sleep that night. I don't mean I tried to sleep and failed. I mean I never even got into bed. I sat on the couch with a cup of lukewarm tea, still holding the photo like it might speak if I stared long enough. Every hour or so, I enlarged the same part of the image, the girl by the bus, until my screen blurred into pixels and back again. Audrey Whitman. She had braces back then, loved cats, got in trouble once for sneaking a kitten into class inside her backpack. Her mother used to send her to school with these cartoon-themed lunch boxes that looked like time capsules from another planet. She was missing. Just like Rory, just like the other 13. But the woman I saw in the cemetery, her walk, her posture, the way she turned away when our eyes met, it wasn't just similar. It was recognized. On some deep lizard brain level that doesn't need logic to scream, that's her. By sunrise, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to wait. I skipped breakfast, threw on a coat, and caught the 6:45 a.m. bus across town. Where to? Well, let's call it a recon mission. I had remembered something odd about that woman's direction the day before. She hadn't walked toward the main road or a parking lot. She'd gone the other way toward a cluster of duplexes near the old elementary school. That's where I started. Now I'm not proud of the next part, so let me frame it as light trespassing with noble intent. I simply strolled through the neighborhood. Slowly, casually, a woman out for a morning walk, who just so happened to glance at every porch, every window. The third house in had a car I recognized, not the license plate, the bumper sticker. It was from the high school music program circa 2006. Audrey had been in band, played flute, I think. The sticker was faded but still legible. I stopped, looked around, then kept walking, then circled back. The house was modest blue siding, too many potted plants by the front steps and curtains that had definitely seen better days. I didn't knock. Not yet. That felt too confrontational. Instead, I walked 2 more blocks to the corner cafe, ordered a croissant I didn't want, and sat by the window with a perfect view of the house. Stakeouts, by the way, are way less exciting than movies make them seem. No trench coat, no earpiece, just a tired woman pretending to enjoy stale pastry while silently hoping no one calls her creepy. At 8:12 a.m., the front door opened, and there she was. Same woman, windbreaker, hair tied back. And here's the kicker, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder with a small enamel pin I recognized instantly. It was the school mascot from '96, a cartoon armadillo holding a book. I'd helped design that damn thing for the PTA. I stood up so fast I knocked my coffee over. By the time I got outside, she was halfway down the block. This time I didn't trail her like a noir detective. I jogged. "Excuse me," I called out. She turned startled, her face pale, her eyes widened. I slowed as I approached, hands visible, trying not to appear like a lunatic. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to scare you. I saw you at the cemetery yesterday." She froze. Silence stretched between us like brittle thread. Then she whispered, "I don't know you." "You don't have to," I replied gently, "but I think I know you, Audrey." She took a step back. "That's not my name." I nodded. "Okay, maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm right, if you are who I think you are, then you know why I can't just walk away." Her eyes shimmered. She glanced down the street like she was considering bolting. Then she said almost inaudibly, "Who are you?" I inhaled slowly. "Laura Calloway, Rory's mother." Audrey flinched like I'd slapped her, and then her shoulders slumped. She looked down at the cracked pavement beneath her feet. I can't do this," she murmured. "You're not supposed to know." Aging wisdom break. Here's when the older I get, the more I realize that people don't hide truths because they're evil. They hide them because they're afraid they'll fall apart without the lie. I didn't push. Maybe we could just talk. Somewhere quiet. Audrey stared at me for a long moment, then finally gave a small nod. "There's a bench by the old school," she said. "No one goes there anymore." As we walked in silence, I noticed the way she moved. Cautiously, like someone who's always listening for something behind them. And suddenly I understood. Whatever happened to the missing kids 27 years ago, Audrey survived it, and she'd spent the rest of her life pretending she didn't. Here's your quirky fact for the road the average person lies 1.65 times per day. But people in witness protection, they lie so well they forget they're doing it. We reached the bench. Audrey sat down slowly, gripping her bag like a lifeline. "I don't know where to begin," she said. "You don't have to," I replied. "I'll sit here until you're ready," and I did. Because some stories don't begin with words. They begin with silence, brave enough to be broken. Audrey didn't speak for a long time. She just sat there staring at her hands, which were pale and trembling, slightly in her lap. The school behind us, once noisy and filled with kids in neon backpacks, stood empty. A graffiti-scarred relic, windows boarded up and swings rusting in slow motion. The only sound was the wind shifting through dry grass, like the building itself was holding its breath. Finally, she whispered, "I used to dream in numbers." I blinked. What I don't know. That's just how I remember it starting. After everything. I would wake up at night with strings of numbers in my head. Not memories, just codes. Page numbers, locker combinations, bus schedules. Things that felt safe because they didn't feel real. She exhaled. That's how I kept myself from remembering what was real. Her voice had the weight of someone who's had to rehearse normalcy for decades. Did the others? I asked softly. She didn't answer right away, just looked down at her fingers twisting her sleeves. Some survived. For a while, I felt the temperature drop. Not literally, it was still mid-autumn and mild, but internally, like my blood took a collective pause. Rory, I asked even softer. Like if I said it gently enough, the answer might be kinder. Audrey shook her head slowly. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. There it was again. The impossible grief that manages to feel brand new no matter how old it is. It washed over me in a dull, relentless wave. Not crashing, just pressing down with familiar weight. I didn't cry. Not yet. I'd already spilled enough tears in public over the years to last a lifetime. Instead, I just nodded. Let it land. Let it stay. I saw the photo, I said. The one with Principal Brooks. Audrey looked away sharply. She told me it was taken at the school, I continued. Before the trip, but when I showed it to her, she hesitated. Almost said it was taken during. Audrey didn't respond. Did she lie to protect you? I asked. She finally met my eyes. She lied to protect herself. And that was the turning point. You could feel it in the air like the moment before lightning strikes, when the hairs on your arm lift and even silence becomes electric. She found me, Audrey said, years after it happened. I don't want to talk about where I was, but I had escaped. I had no one. I was surviving, hiding. She swallowed hard. She found me and said she would help, that no one else could. She paid for my housing, helped me get clean clothes, get therapy, but there were conditions. I already knew what she was going to say next. She made me promise never to tell. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Audrey by the shoulders and say, why? Why let us suffer for nearly 3 decades if she knew you were alive? But the look on Audrey's face stopped me. She was already doing that to herself. Was she involved? I asked. Audrey hesitated, not directly, but she knew what would happen if she backed out. And she didn't. Here's the academic phrase for this section: culpable negligence. When someone doesn't commit the crime but lets it happen anyway and benefits from the silence. She said it would destroy the families all over again, Audrey whispered. That reopening the wound would be worse than letting it scar over. She was wrong, I said quietly. Audrey nodded. I know that now. But for a long time, I needed to believe her. There's a kind of wisdom you only earn from heartbreak. Not all survivors are saved. Some are just left behind longer. That was Audrey. Not dead, not free, just paused. Do you know who else made it out? I asked. She shook her head. We were separated. The ones who didn't adjust or didn't follow instructions, they disappeared. I think some didn't make it through the first year. The words landed like stones. But you did, I said. You're here. Barely, she murmured. We sat in silence, the kind that isn't awkward but earned, like old friends who've just run out of small talk and fallen into truth. Then she said something I didn't expect. I visit the cemetery every year, same day, same time, but I stay on the far side. I never wanted to be seen. Why now? She smiled faintly. You saw me, and you didn't look away. Sometimes all it takes is one witness to make pain speak. I want to go to the police, she said, but I'm scared. What if they don't believe me? What if it brings nothing but more pain? They'll believe you, I said, and if they don't, I'll make them. She almost laughed at that. You sound like my mother. Take it as a compliment. She looked at the sky, which was beginning to cloud again, and nodded slowly. Okay, she said. I'll go. Then she looked at me again. Really looked. Thank you, she whispered. And I realized I was the first person to see her, and not as a mystery or a ghost, but as someone who had finally stopped hiding. Here's your quirky fact before we end this part. Human bones can outlast fire flood in time, but a name spoken with love that lasts even longer. We stood up, and just like that, the silence was broken. Not with answers, but with willingness. The station smelled like too much floor cleaner and old printer ink. You know the kind of institutional scent that feels sterile but also a little panicked, like it's trying too hard to erase what lingers in the corners. Audrey and I stood just inside the glass double doors. She kept fiddling with the strap of her canvas bag while I tried not to notice how fast her breathing had become. I don't think she'd been inside a police station since, well, since before. I can do the talking, I offered. She shook her head. No, I need to do this. The officer at the front desk, a young woman, maybe late 20s, looked up and smiled the way people smile when they assume you're there to drop off a lost wallet. Hi there, can I help you? Audrey stepped forward. Her voice was small but steady. I need to speak to someone about the 1996 case, the missing school children. I was one of them. There was a beat, a half second where the officer's brain clearly tried to file that sentence into a category and failed. Then her smile faltered. What's your name, ma'am? Audrey Whitman. I watched the officer's eyes flicker to her monitor fingers already tapping keys. Just a moment. She disappeared into the back before I could say anything else. Audrey sat down beside me on one of those hard plastic chairs, the kind that are always bolted to the floor like they expect people to panic and throw furniture. Her hands were clenched in her lap. Do you think they'll believe me? She whispered. I didn't lie to her. I think you are about to change everything. Within minutes, a detective emerged. I recognized him instantly. Detective Jensen. He had worked the original case. Back then, he was just a junior officer with more stubble than authority. But now the years had added to his shoulders. He wasn't gray yet, but the weight was there. Mrs. Calloway, he said, surprised. Didn't expect to see you here again. Neither did I replied. But I brought someone you need to hear. Jensen turned to Audrey, his eyes scanning her face carefully. I saw the flicker of disbelief, the mental war between skepticism and recognition. Then understanding. Come with me, he said gently. They disappeared behind the frosted door marked Interview 1, and I was left outside, waiting. Again. Here's your academic debate of the day. Does trauma crystallize memory or distort it? Depends who you ask. Neuroscientists will argue both. But grieving mothers, we tend to remember with a kind of clarity that isn't always kind. I sat alone in that hallway for 40 minutes, maybe more. I read the same 3 posters on the wall over and over. One about community outreach, one about preventing cybercrime, and one faded and curling at the edges about missing children. Rory's name was still on it. I let myself cry then, quietly, not sobbing, just a steady leak of sorrow. Like my body had sprung a grief faucet and I didn't know where the handle was anymore. Then the door opened. Jensen stepped out, his face unreadable. Mrs. Calloway, he said, we need you to come in. When I entered, Audrey was pale but upright. Her hands were clasped on the table like she was holding on for dear life, but her eyes met mine without flinching. She told us everything, Jensen said, and I believe her. I exhaled, so slowly I thought my lungs might collapse on the way down. We've already dispatched a unit to Principal Brooks's residence, he added. I blinked. She's still in town. He nodded. We've kept tabs over the years, just in case. Audrey looked down at her lap. She's going to hate me. No, I said, voice firm. She already failed you. This is you finally protecting yourself. You ever notice how villains in real life rarely look like villains? No capes, no twirling mustaches, just PTA chairs and principals with firm handshakes. That's your aging wisdom for this part. Evil isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers kindly and wears sensible shoes. We waited. An hour passed, then 2. By the time the arresting officers returned with Lillian Brooks in handcuffs, the sun outside had shifted. It cast long shadows across the station floor. And for the first time in decades, I felt the sun land on something real. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her blazer was pressed, her hair pinned tight, but her hands were shaking. She didn't say anything. Not to me, not to Audrey, but her eyes said everything. They said I thought you'd never speak, and they said I was wrong. Here's your quirky fact before we end this part. The average adult makes 35,000 decisions every day. Lillian Brooks made a handful in 1996, and they ruined dozens of lives. But today, someone made the right one. They booked her under her maiden name. I don't know why that detail stood out, but it did. Maybe because Brooks sounded official like a principal. But the name they typed into the system, Lillian Ann Greenfield, felt small, civilian, suddenly human, like the armor had finally cracked. Audrey and I watched from the bench outside the interview rooms. She was holding a paper cup of water with both hands as if it might run away if she didn't cling to it. I wasn't doing much better. My knees had started bouncing at some point and refused to stop. They didn't cuff her hands in front, Audrey whispered. They walked her in like she was just another witness. She's not, I replied, not anymore. Here's a quirky fact for you. According to one outdated policy manual, school administrators in Texas were once considered non-critical first responders during student emergencies. That label. It always annoyed me, especially now, because if Principal Brooks had responded at all when things first started going wrong, maybe none of this would have happened. The detective came back about 20 minutes later. Jensen had a folder in one hand and an expression that looked like he'd aged another decade in the past hour. She's talking, he said, but only because she knows Audrey's testimony already confirms parts of it. I nodded slow. So, what now? We reopened the entire case. The words hit me like an old piano chord, familiar, mournful, and somehow hopeful. I thought I'd never hear them again. Case reopened. Not closed, not cold. Open. Jensen glanced toward Audrey. You okay to stay and give your full statement? Audrey nodded, not confidently but steadily. Yes. As they led her into the formal interrogation room, she paused and looked back at me. I don't know how much I remember, she said, but I'll try. That's the thing about trauma, it doesn't disappear. It just changes clothes, hides inside smells and textures, sometimes numbers. But when it's ready, it steps back into the room and waits for you to stop pretending it isn't there. I stayed in the waiting room while she spoke. Hour after hour passed and the station buzzed like a hive poked with a stick. Phones rang. Officers hustled in and out. One officer spilled coffee and cursed under his breath, then apologized because he'd forgotten I was there. The sun had set before Jensen returned. She gave us names, he said, locations, descriptions, even sketchy details about what happened after the kids disappeared. I braced myself. Most of them didn't survive, he added gently. There it was. I'd waited 27 years to hear those words, prayed that they would never be said, and also that someone would finally say them. Rory, I asked. He nodded slowly. We believe she died within the first 48 hours, possibly a drug overdose administered by her captors. I closed my eyes. And in that moment, something inside me stopped clenching. Not because the pain was gone, but because the not knowing was. Here's the aging wisdom for today. Closure doesn't erase grief. It just gives it a chair to sit on so it doesn't wander the halls at night. Jensen kept talking about warrants being drafted, a task force being assembled, potential cooperation with Mexican authorities, but his words became background noise. All I could think about was that I could finally tell Rory wherever she was, I didn't stop. I never stopped. When Audrey came out, her face was pale and drawn, but she looked lighter, not healed, not whole, but started, like someone who had finally begun walking towards something instead of away from it. You did it, I told her. She shook her head. You saw me. You asked. Would you have come forward eventually? She hesitated. Maybe, but probably not in time to help anyone else. He hugged her then, carefully but sincerely. It felt strange to hold someone who had once sat next to my daughter in class, who had vanished from the same field trip, who had returned not intact but alive. You know what haunts me most that none of us noticed? We went to meetings, held vigils, printed flyers. We lit candles and gave interviews. But none of us ever thought to look for who might have made it back in secret. Here's your academic phrase of the night survivor: invisibility. It's a real psychological phenomenon. The way communities focus so hard on mourning the lost, they forget to recognize the returned. By the time I got home, it was past midnight. I poured myself a glass of water, looked out the window, thought about calling Helen, but I knew it would be better to tell her in person. I held Rory's photo in my hands and whispered, I found her. Not you, but someone. And in a way that was enough to keep going. The next morning started like any other, which felt wrong because nothing was the same anymore. The light came in through the window like it always did, filtered through the sheer curtain Rory once helped me pick out. It painted soft lines on the floor, and for a moment I just lay there watching them, remembering how she'd run her fingers along that fabric as a little girl pretending it was fairy silk. I wanted that memory to feel warm. It didn't. It felt sharp. There's this myth that finding answers brings peace, but no one tells you that answers have their own kind of violence. Like opening a sealed letter you forgot you wrote only to realize it's covered in blood. After breakfast, I called Helen. I need to talk to you, in person. Her silence on the other end was short, but heavy. When now? When she opened the door 20 minutes later, I didn't wait. I held out the photo, the same one with the school bus, the same one with Principal Brooks, and I told her everything. She listened without interruption, standing in her hallway in slippers and an old sweater, her hands curled around a chipped mug of chamomile. When I finished, she sat down slowly on the stairs and stared at nothing. Audrey, she murmured. Alive, I nodded. And she remembers Sally. Helen blinked hard. I don't know what to feel right now. You don't have to know, I said. I'm not sure I do either. We sat like that for a while. No plan, no script. Eventually she said, I want to meet her. And I realized, of course she did. Because even if it brought more pain, knowing was better than guessing. Silence had been our jail cell for decades. Audrey now was the key rattling in the lock. By afternoon, we were back at the station. The detectives were already forming a task force. Audrey had agreed to provide a statement about each child. She remembered the ones who'd survived a little longer, the ones who didn't, the ones she never saw again. She looked exhausted, but something in her posture had changed. She stood taller, not proud, just no longer folded in half by the weight of secrecy. Helen approached her like someone walking into a church, quiet, reverent, full of hope and dread. Do you remember Sally, she asked. Audrey's face crumpled in a way that told us yes before she said a word. She was kind to me, Audrey whispered. She shared her lunch when I was too scared to eat mine. Helen covered her mouth with one hand, the other gripping the chair to stay upright. And did she? Audrey nodded slowly. Not long after Rory. They were kept together for a bit. The thing about hearing your child's name in the past tense is that no matter how many years have passed, it always feels like the first time. I reached for Helen's hand, and we just sat there, three women, one truth, and the ghosts between us. Here's your aging wisdom of the day. You don't move on from grief. You grow roots in it, learn to walk with it, trailing behind like a second shadow. Later, while Audrey was inside with the detectives again, Helen and I stood outside the precinct. It was overcast. A cold wind blew leaves in spirals around our feet. She was just a kid, Helen said. I know. And Principal Brooks helped her survive and silenced her in return. Helen shook her head. It's monstrous and human and complicated. Most things are. Here's your quirky fact. In the 1960s, scientists discovered that mice will choose comfort over food when stressed. They'll huddle with warm objects instead of eating. We're not so different. When everything breaks, we don't look for logic. We look for softness. That night, I sat in Rory's old room. Still mostly untouched, though I'd stopped pretending she might come back years ago. I opened the dresser and took out the shirt she wore the day before the trip. Faded lilac, one tiny rip at the hem. I held it to my face and just breathed. They say scent is the strongest tie to memory. It's true. The shirt didn't smell like Rory anymore. It smelled like time, but somehow even that was something. In the distance, a siren cried into the night. Another arrest, maybe. Another consequence of Audrey's truth. I whispered, good. Not out of vengeance, but because it meant this wasn't just a story we carried anymore. It was one someone else was carrying too. Someone with a badge, a folder, a warrant. This wasn't the end. But for the first time, it finally felt like the middle. There are strange things you notice when an old case becomes active again. For one, your phone stops being quiet. Detectives, journalists, survivors, everyone suddenly wants a piece of the puzzle. Everyone wants your quote, your memory, your scrap of paper from 1996. My voicemail was full by noon, and I hadn't even had a chance to brush my hair. I spent most of the day ignoring calls and pacing my living room. Every few hours, someone from the precinct would update me. Another name matched another location traced. A retired teacher in Arkansas remembered a new foster girl who matched Audrey's description in '99. A nurse in El Paso swore she saw one of the boys at a free clinic around the same time. Most of it was noise, but some of it wasn't. They were beginning to rebuild what happened, piece by piece. A timeline was emerging, fuzzy, yes, but something that breathed, something that pointed in the direction of truth. And in the center of that map, Audrey. She came by that evening, not because she had to, because she wanted to. I just wanted to sit, she said, somewhere that doesn't feel like paperwork and fluorescent lights. I made us tea. Lavender Earl Grey. I didn't think she'd like it, but she sipped it quietly. We sat on the floor of Rory's room, backs against the wall, legs stretched out like teenagers. I always hated the color of this carpet, I said suddenly. Audrey smiled faintly. It's very pink. Rory begged for it, said it looked like bubblegum in dreams. She was like that, Audrey murmured. Big dreams. Here's your aging wisdom. The dead don't disappear. They just get quieter in the room. Eventually you don't hear them. But you still feel when they leave. I still have nightmares, Audrey said, staring at the closet door. Not of the bad things, of coming back, of walking into this world like nothing happened, and people looking at me like I ruined it. I didn't have the right words, so I said, the only ones I had. You didn't ruin anything. You survived something that should have killed you. That's not shame, that's defiance. She blinked hard. Principal Brooks said the families wouldn't want me back. Principal Brooks is in a cell, I reminded her. Let's leave her there. Here's your academic phrase of the day, narrative control trauma, when a victim's story is shaped by those around them so severely they stop recognizing their own voice. Audrey pulled something from her bag. A folded piece of notebook, paper crumpled and yellowed. She handed it to me. I wrote this in 2001. I never showed it to anyone. It was a letter. To her parents. Just 3 lines. I'm not dead. I'm just different now. Please forgive me for staying gone. Please forgive me for coming back. I don't know if I can give it to them, she whispered. I looked at her. Then don't. Give it to yourself. She smiled again, this time almost real. We spent another hour talking about the past, the in-between years, the weird things she still remembered, a poster on the wall of the van, the taste of tin cups, the way one of the captors hummed Blue Moon off key every night. Details. Details that made the story real. That's your quirky fact. Humans remember trauma in snapshots, not videos. Tiny fragments, not smooth timelines. That's why courts hate memory, but healing needs it. By the time Audrey left, the moon was high and the air outside had turned sharp. I walked her to the sidewalk, and for the first time in 27 years, I felt like I was watching someone come home instead of disappear. She turned before getting in her cab. I hope someday someone says Rory's name and smiles instead of apologizing. I nodded, tears prickling. They will. You just did. As the cab pulled away, I stood in the dark, arm crossed, listening to the engine fade into silence. And for the first time since 1996, I didn't feel like the only one left. The next morning, I visited the school. It had been closed for over a decade, its budget quietly swallowed by district reshuffles and bad press. But the building still stood, weathered, graffiti-tagged, and hollow like a stage waiting for its actors to return. I parked across the street and just looked at it. Funny how something once filled with noise, shouts at recess, intercom, crackles, the buzz of fluorescent lights could now feel like a mausoleum. I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was looking for something. More accurately, someone. An old custodian named Eddie Mullaney used to work the grounds, retired after the disappearance, never gave interviews. But Jensen mentioned that he still lived in town and occasionally drove by the school just to check it hadn't collapsed. He was already there when I arrived, leaning against the fence, puffing on a vape pen with a sticker that read, "World's okayest Grandpa." "Mr. Mullaney," I called. He looked up startled, then squinted at me through thick lenses. "Yeah, Laura Calloway," I said gently. "Rory's mom." His shoulders dropped. "Oh, yeah, I remember you." He motioned to the sidewalk. "Come on, let's walk a bit." We didn't talk for the first stretch, just paced along the chain-link perimeter past faded no trespassing signs and a toppled plastic slide covered in vines. Then he said, "I always knew something was off about that trip. Why didn't you say anything back then?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. Who was going to believe the janitor? The guy who mops vomit and tightens desk bolts. Try me, I said. He nodded. It was the staff sign-out sheet, day of the field trip. I logged it like I always did, only it wasn't the teacher who signed the bus release. It was Lillian. My stomach dropped. She signed the release form, yup, and crossed it out 2 hours later. Rewrote it with Mr. Gregory's name. Said she was correcting an admin error. I paused. Did anyone check timestamps? No one asked. Here's your academic phrase for the day: institutional blind trust. When systems are so used to running themselves that no one checks if they've gone off track. She wasn't supposed to go, I asked. Mulaney shrugged. She went, I saw her, black pantsuit, hair in that awful claw clip. She stood next to the bus and talked to the driver. Looked nervous. Why didn't you report that later? I did, he said. Once. To one of the officers, but they were already set on Mr. Gregory being the last adult seen with the kids. I got the sense they didn't want to complicate the narrative. That landed like a punch, because I remembered those early days. The interviews, the press conferences, the push to streamline the investigation. Brooks had disappeared from suspicion, not by hiding, just by being usefully invisible. She ever come back here, I asked. He nodded. Couple times, always after hours. Never spoke to anyone, just walked the halls. Once I found her in the old AV room, sitting in the dark. Doing what? Crying. There it was again. That complication I hated: empathy. I didn't want to feel sorry for her, but part of me knew that guilt had probably corroded her from the inside long before the cuffs ever touched her wrists. Here's your aging wisdom. Sometimes the villain is just someone who kept saying, "It's not my job," until it was too late to fix anything. I thanked Eddie, gave him my number, told him someone from the task force might want to follow up. You tell them what you told me, I said. He gave me a tired look. You really think they'll listen? Now I think someone has to. When I got home, I pulled out Rory's old backpack. Yes, I kept it, tucked away in a trunk with her drawings and spelling tests, and that letter she wrote to the tooth fairy, insisting she deserved $2 because the tooth took a whole week to come out. Inside was a folder, one I hadn't opened in years. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe just a reminder that she'd been real. But then tucked in the back, I found something else. A small strip of photo booth prints. Rory and Audrey, smiling, cross-eyed, one with their cheeks squished together like twins. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. Audrey answered on the second ring. Hey, I found something, I said. A pause. Good or bad? Both. And I meant it. Because this case was no longer just about closure. It was about preservation of memory, of truth of each other. I met Audrey at the park that afternoon. It wasn't planned. I just texted her. You free? And she replied with a simple, I think I should be. That's how she phrases most things now. Should be might be could come. As if she's still not quite ready to promise her presence in the world. The park was empty. School wasn't out yet. Just a few birds pecking at breadcrumbs and one overly confident squirrel trying to steal my granola bar. I brought the photo strip with me. I handed it to her without a word. She looked at it, blinked once, and then pressed her hand to her mouth. She didn't cry. Not exactly. Her eyes just kind of filled, like a glass someone forgot to stop pouring into. Where did you find this? She whispered. In Rory's folder. It was tucked behind a spelling test about aquatic mammals. She traced their faces with one finger. I forgot we even did this, she said. We skipped lunch to take them. Got in trouble for being late to science. Worth it, I said softly. She nodded. Do you remember the day of the trip? I asked gently. Before the bus left, Audrey closed her eyes. I remember the excitement. Everyone had snacks. We were going to the botanical gardens. Rory brought a disposable camera with sparkly stickers all over it. I remember her saying, I'm going to take a picture of a bee if it stings me. I smiled. That sounds like her. And I remember she continued when we lined up to board the bus. Principal Brooks was there. Not just passing by. She counted us. Like she was responsible. My smile faded. She told police she didn't go, I murmured. Audrey nodded. She lied. We sat in silence for a while. A long, breath-held kind of quiet. Then Audrey said something that broke it. I think they were selling us. I looked at her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shaking. Her voice was level factual. That's why they kept us alive, at least at first. I remember overhearing someone mention buyers arriving tomorrow, like we were inventory. It didn't make sense until I was older. I felt sick. Do you remember? Who took you? I asked. She shook her head, faces blur, voices echo. But I remember the smell of motor oil and oranges. There was always a box of citrus in the truck. Quirky fact of the day, some studies show smell triggers memory better than images. Not surprising. Horror doesn't come back in flashbacks, it comes back in sense. I think she added quietly, Lillian owed someone, money maybe, or favors. I don't think she planned it all, but I think when she realized what they wanted, she didn't stop it. She let it happen. Yes, I looked down at the photo strip again. Rory and Audrey had drawn cat whiskers on each other with eyeliner in the last frame. I remember Rory coming home that day still wearing them, giggling. It felt like another life. It's weird, Audrey said. I thought I'd feel better once I told someone, but it just feels heavier. Here's your aging wisdom. Truth doesn't lighten the load, it just lets you shift it to a shoulder that can carry it longer. We're going to tell the other families, I said. They deserve to know, Audrey nodded. I want to help, if I can. You already are. She smiled barely. The detectives want me to testify, but I'm scared. Not just of them, of being in a room full of people who lost kids and having to say, I made it. They'll understand, I said. Most of them will just be grateful you came back at all. And the ones who aren't, they hesitated. They've been talking to ghosts for 27 years. Sometimes the living make poor substitutes. We sat there until the sun dipped behind the elm trees. Then she said, do you want to go somewhere where I want to see the bus lot, where they used to park? My throat tightened. It's still there, Jensen said. It was fenced off, but not demolished. Let's go. And we did. The gate was rusted, the ground cracked and full of weeds, but the yellow paint of the old buses still peeked through. And then we saw it. Bus number 48, the one from the photos, the one that never returned. It sat half sunk into the earth, windows fogged from inside. Faded paint, door rusted shut. We didn't speak. We just stood there, two women 30 years older than the last time we saw that bus, staring at it like it might finally open its mouth and explain itself. But it didn't, because buses don't talk, survivors do. The rusted bus loomed like a memory we could touch but not change. Audrey approached first. Her boots crunched over gravel as she stepped toward bus number 48. I followed a few paces behind, my heart knocking unevenly against my ribs. The kind of rhythm that doesn't belong to fear exactly, but to recognition. This is it, she said softly. This is where it started. The windows were clouded but still intact. Through one of them, I could barely make out the outlines of the seats inside. Torn vinyl, dust motes suspended in stale air. A forgotten world. I sat in the fourth row, Audrey murmured. On the left. Rory was right behind me. I looked down at the gravel beneath our feet. Weeds curled up through the cracks like they too had been waiting for someone to come back. She was humming that morning, Audrey added. I don't know what song. Something bright. I remember thinking, don't be happy. It's too early to be happy. But I didn't say it. And now I wish I had. Just so I'd have said something. Here's your aging wisdom. Regret isn't about what we did. It's about what we left unsaid. I reached out and touched the side of the bus. The metal was cold despite the sun. Layers of paint bubbled and peeled beneath my fingers. You know what's strange, I said. What? This thing, this old broken machine, has probably been more stable than any of us. Audrey let out a dry laugh. At least it didn't try to pretend it was okay. We circled around the back. There was a hand-painted number in faded black, 48. No slogans, no logos, just that. It felt surreal, like we were walking through a prop from a play no one finished. Audrey stared at the emergency door. I remember she whispered we stopped for gas. That's when things got weird. The teacher went inside to buy snacks. But when he came back out, there were new people. They got on, took the front seats. My stomach turned. Adults, she nodded. 3 of them. None of us knew who they were. They didn't wear uniforms. One of them had a clipboard. That made it seem official somehow. But they didn't talk to us. Did the teacher react? He looked confused, but he didn't argue. That's the last time I saw him. We stood in silence, the wind threading itself through the fence, through the rusted metal ribs of the bus. Then Audrey said something that turned my blood cold. I think he tried to stop them. That's why he disappeared first. I turned toward her. I always believed Mr. Gregory was involved, I said quietly. The police said he was the only staff confirmed on the bus. They were wrong, Audrey said. He was scared. I remember that. He kept looking back at us like he was trying to memorize our faces. Here's your academic phrase of the day: narrative collapse, when the accepted story starts unraveling under the weight of new evidence. And that's what was happening. Not just with Principal Brooks, not just with Audrey, but with the whole foundation we'd built our grief on. I need to talk to Jensen, I said. I'll come with you. We left the lot, walking away from bus number 48 without looking back. Some monuments don't need flowers, just footsteps. At the station, the mood had shifted. There were maps on the walls now, pins, photos, names. It looked like an actual operation, a movement. Detective Jensen waved us into the back conference room. More coming in from the task force, he said. Some survivors have been tentatively ID'd in border regions. We're contacting consulates. I cut to the point. Mr. Gregory may have tried to help. Audrey just remembered. Jensen straightened. Go on. Audrey repeated the story, halting but firm. The gas station stop, the unknown men, Gregory's confusion, his disappearance. I think they used his name to cover for Lillian, I added. Remember the staff sign-out sheets? Jensen nodded. The custodians already corroborated that. It changes the picture, I said. He wasn't the perpetrator. He might have been the first victim. Jensen sat back slowly. We may need to issue a formal exoneration. That word exoneration hit me harder than I expected. Because somewhere out there, Gregory's family had been living with the label of monster for 27 years. And they never knew they were grieving the wrong kind of absence. Will you tell them, Audrey asked. Jensen nodded. We will. Carefully. Then he turned to her. You've done something extraordinary, he said. Audrey looked away. I didn't want to be extraordinary. I just wanted to survive. You did, I said. And now you're doing more. That evening, we walked out of the station into the orange glow of sunset. The air smelled like warm pavement and something sweeter, maybe jasmine from a nearby yard. Audrey turned to me. Do you think Rory would have forgiven me? I didn't answer right away. Then I said Rory was stubborn, kind, and loyal to a fault. She once forgave a girl for stealing her favorite hair clip just because the girl was crying. So yeah, Audrey, I think she would have forgiven you. Audrey smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Here's your quirky fact to close. Elephants mourn their dead with rituals. But when they find someone they thought lost, they trumpet. Loud, proud, alive. That night I didn't light a candle. I turned on every light in the house. Because this time we were done being in the dark. I didn't think anything could surprise me after that week. But the letter did. It arrived the next morning. No return address. Handwritten. Slightly smudged in the corner, like someone had sealed it while crying. The handwriting was unfamiliar, slanted, hurried, but something about it made my fingers tremble before I even tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo came first. A group of children in what looked like a dusty backyard. Some barefoot, some thin, all staring straight at the camera with expressions too serious for their age. It wasn't the kind of photo you take to remember, it was the kind you take to prove something happened. In the middle row, slightly turned away, was Rory. My breath caught. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't afraid either, just watching. Her hair was longer than I remembered. She looked older than 11, almost 13. Her arm was slung protectively in front of another child, a little girl whose face I didn't recognize. Then the letter. It read, Mrs. Calloway, I don't know if you'll ever see this. I don't even know if I should be writing, but someone told me you never gave up. And I wanted you to know that Rory didn't either. She helped us, protected us when the others couldn't. She taught me how to braid my hair. She told stories when we couldn't sleep. She kept hope alive longer than any of us thought possible. She died saving someone else, not in pain, not alone. I was there. She told me to tell you that she loved you more than stars and rivers and cookies warm from the oven. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I carry that, and I always will. But please know she mattered. She changed us. She was more than what they took. I hope this gives you something. Maybe not peace, but truth. Our Just an initial, not Audrey, not anyone I knew, someone else. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last. By the end, I was gripping the edges of the page like it might dissolve. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about grief. You beg for answers until you get one, and then you don't know what to do with it. I held the photo close, tracing Rory's face with my thumb. I whispered, "You were brave." Because no matter how much time passes, a mother still wants her child to know she sees them. Later that day, Audrey came over. I showed her the letter and the photo. She stared at both for a long time, her jaw tight. "I think I know who wrote it," she said finally. "There was a girl named Rena, older than us. She disappeared a year before your group. I thought she was gone, but maybe she got out later." She remembered Rory. She'd never forget Rory. We sat in silence. And then Audrey asked a question I didn't expect. "What do we do with this?" I looked at the letter again. "We make sure it's not the last one. Here's your aging wisdom. The opposite of silence isn't noise. It's continuation. Legacy, echo, the story told one more time in one more way." So we started making calls. To the families, to Jensen, to the outreach team that had begun forming through the precinct. Audrey volunteered to be a liaison. She said it like a joke, trauma concierge, but I could tell it meant something to her. Something redeeming. Within a week, a public statement was issued. Carefully worded, respectful, but honest. There were survivors. There had been cover-ups. And now, finally, there was movement toward justice. TV stations picked it up. Some twisted it, some didn't. But none of them could undo the truth we now held in our hands. One morning, Helen and I stood outside the school again. This time not as mourners, but as witnesses. "They're going to demolish it," she said, nodding toward the building. "Turn it into a memorial park." I watched a bird land on the chain-link fence, cock its head, and fly off again. "About time," I said. She looked at me. "You okay?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm not only not okay, I'm also grateful. Angry, relieved, determined." She smiled. "That's a lot of feelings for one sentence. I've had 27 years to collect them." That night I wrote back to whoever they were. I wrote, "Your words gave me back something I thought was gone. Thank you for carrying in her memory when I couldn't. If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'll be here. And if not, just know I believe you. I believe all of you." I didn't sign it as Mrs. Calloway. I signed it as Laura, because grief ages you, but survival names you. Here's your quirky fact: when a star dies, it doesn't vanish. It becomes part of the dust that births new stars. We are all, scientifically speaking, made of remnants. Rory wasn't lost. She was woven into everything that came after. The memorial service was held exactly 1 month after Audrey's testimony. The town hadn't hosted a gathering like it in years, not since the 3rd anniversary of the disappearance, when the grief was still raw enough to draw crowds, but not yet painful enough to scatter them. This time the people came back, some with gray in their hair, some with canes, many with eyes that looked just like mine, tired, watchful, waiting for something to finally end. They held candles, though it was the middle of the day, because light, even symbolic, still matters when you're honoring the long dark. Helen stood beside me, holding a bouquet of wildflowers from her garden. "They told me the new park's going to be named Echo Field," she whispered. "To remember that every name still echoes somewhere." I nodded. Perfect. They had set up 15 empty school chairs in a row, real ones, scuffed plastic metal legs still wrapped in masking tape from the old classrooms. On each seat, a laminated photo. Rory, Sally, the others. Audrey stood near the back, close to the hedge line. She wore a simple black dress, no makeup, no performance. She was there to be seen, not to speak, because this time, the town was speaking for her. Detective Jensen read from a statement. Words like systemic failure, institutional silence, and accountability and progress were spoken with a kind of reverence usually reserved for eulogies. Maybe because in a way they were. Then the microphone passed to the families, and I found myself walking forward. I hadn't planned to speak. I'd written nothing, but grief makes you bold in the strangest ways. "Hi," I said. "I'm Laura, Rory's mom." A soft murmur of recognition. She would have turned 39 this year. She would have been stubborn, I'm sure. She would have argued about politics at dinner, sung off key in the car, and probably bought plants she forgot to water. a few chuckles, and tears. She was a million things, none of which are in the file the police kept. I paused. The wind picked up, tugging gently at the corner of Rory's laminated photo. Truth is, we don't always get justice, but we can get something else, something harder, messier, braver. I looked toward Audrey. We can get honesty, and maybe even peace. Here's your aging wisdom. Justice is what the law provides. Healing is what we give each other. After the service, people lingered. They touched the chairs gently, spoke to the photos like old friends. A few reporters hovered, respectfully, microphones down. For once, they didn't ask questions. They just listened. Later, Helen and I sat on the edge of the field, our shoes pressed into soft soil that would someday be grass again. "She'd be proud of you," Helen said. "Maybe. I like to think she's annoyed," I cried during the speech. Helen smiled. "She always hated when you got mushy." I laughed, then wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my jacket. Audrey approached, slow, careful, like she didn't want to break the moment. "You okay?" I asked. She shrugged, still breathing. "That's more than enough." She reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth napkin. "I've been meaning to return this." It was Rory's bracelet, the one with the mismatched beads and the tiny silver music note charm. She'd made it at a birthday party in 4th grade and never took it off until the day she got on that bus. "I thought it was lost," I whispered. "I kept it," Audrey said. "All this time. I don't know why. Maybe to remind myself that not everything was taken." Here's your quirky fact. In ancient Rome, people believed objects held memories, that wearing someone's ring or keeping their trinket could protect you with their essence. I slipped the bracelet into my pocket. No magic, just memory. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and began writing. Not to the police, not to the press, to Rory, dear Rory. It took a long time, but we know now, we know. You were brave, you were kind, and you never stopped trying. Neither did I. Love always, Mom. I left it on her windowsill, beside the photo, beside the chair no one else ever sat in again. And for the first time in decades, the house felt still. Not empty, not haunted, just quiet. Because there was nothing left to chase. Only things left to remember. I thought things would go quiet after the memorial, but truth doesn't just echo, it ripples. That week, 2 more letters arrived. One from a boy who'd escaped in Guatemala in 2004, now living under a different name. The other from a woman in Montana whose younger brother had disappeared from another school the same year as Rory. Her letter wasn't long, just a paragraph, but it ended with, "I always thought I was crazy to believe it was connected. Now I know I wasn't." Each letter was a match struck in the dark. The police, for once, moved quickly. Names were added to a new list, one that wasn't just about who was gone, but who might still be out there. The investigation had shifted. It wasn't just about looking back anymore. Now they were reaching forward. And I had changed too. I wasn't just the grieving mother anymore. I became something else. Something I hadn't expected. A voice. They asked me to speak at a closed-door panel on missing persons protocol. Not for the media. For lawmakers. I wore a navy blouse, Rory once told me, made me look too serious, like a library policewoman. It felt appropriate. "I'm not here to explain trauma," I told them. "I'm here to remind you it has memory. If you leave people in the dark long enough, they start setting fires just to see what's still around them." Audrey came with me. She didn't speak. She just sat in the second row, hands folded, head held high. I think she needed to see the system look her in the eye. And they did. They didn't apologize, not outright. But I watched their posture change. That's something grief teaches you, not to listen to words, but to wait. And the room got heavier. Here's your aging wisdom. Justice is rarely spoken. It's usually silent and awkward and late. But sometimes it still arrives. After the panel, Audrey and I stopped at a bookstore on a whim. She picked up a small journal with a marbled blue cover. "I think I want to start writing," she said. "Memoir." Maybe she smiled. Maybe something else. "I want to tell a story where the girl gets away." "You already did." She looked down at the journal, ran her fingers across its cover like it might vanish. "Not enough. I want to write it so no one forgets it next time." Here's your quirky fact. Some trees in Australia don't release their seeds unless there's a fire. It's called serotonin. Destruction wakes birth. When I got home that night, Helen was on my porch. She was holding a sealed box. "What's this?" I asked. She hesitated. "I think it's time." We opened it together at my kitchen table. Inside were Sally's school papers, her diary, and an old cassette tape. "I found it while cleaning last week," Helen said. I hadn't listened. I couldn't. But now, we played it. A high-pitched warble filled the room. Kids singing, off-key, loud, beautiful. Then Rory's voice. "And this is Sally, and I'm Rory, and this is our weather report. Today is mostly awesome with a chance of snacks." Helen's hand flew to her mouth. We sat through the whole recording. 10 minutes of chaos, 10 minutes of childhood, 10 minutes of presence. When it ended, we both sat in silence, stunned by how full something so simple could feel. "I forgot her voice," Helen whispered. "You remembered it, just not until now." Here's your academic phrase, passive memory activation. When one sense, sound, smell, touch opens the floodgates. It happened again the next morning. I was making toast when I suddenly remembered Rory's knock-knock jokes. She had a favorite knock-knock. "Who's there, Olive?" "Olive who, Olive? You, even when you steal my snacks." I laughed out loud, not cried, not winced, laughed. And it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like permission. That afternoon, I visited Audrey again. She was writing already, pages spread out across her coffee table. Not neat, not ordered, but real. She held up a page with a hand-drawn map. "What's this where we were taken?" "The route as best I remember it." I studied it. "Can I show Jensen?" "Not yet," she said. "Soon. Let me finish the story first." And that's when I realized this wasn't just about solving a crime anymore. This was about building a record. Not the kind tucked in file cabinets, but one that lived, that breathed. A story written not for closure, but for continuation. As I left her place, she called out, "Laura, yeah, you never gave up." I smiled. "Neither did you." And that's the thing no one says about survival. It doesn't always look like running or fighting or screaming. Sometimes survival is just showing up again. One more morning, one more truth, one more page. There was no big ending, no courtroom climax, no handcuffed villain confessing under fluorescent lights, no slow-motion reunion. Real stories, especially the ones that take 27 years, don't end that way. They taper, they breathe, they settle like dust on a windowsill, soft and inevitable. In the weeks after the memorial, things changed, but not in dramatic ways. More like stitching, quiet repairs. Audrey began attending the survivor grow-up sessions, small circles of folding chairs and coffee and paper cups. She never spoke in the first 2 meetings, just listened, took notes, wrote in her marbled journal. At the third one, she brought a drawing. It was a simple sketch of the bus from memory. Window lines uneven, a child's face in the back row. No label, no explanation. She passed it around. No one asked questions. They just nodded. One woman cried. Another man held the drawing to his chest for a long moment before handing it back. That's how survivors communicate sometimes. Without words. I visited Helen more often. Our ritual changed from tea to walking. We'd circle the new memorial park slowly, once clockwise, once counter. She said it felt like unwinding grief and then winding it back up gently, deliberately. Some days we didn't speak at all, just walked. They installed benches with the victims' names engraved on them. Not as a list, but as a loop forming a circle around the center garden. Rory's name was between Sally and Jonah Kim, a boy who once tried to eat a caterpillar on a dare and gave himself hives. I remember him because Rory came home and declared, "Boys are interesting but extremely unhygienic." Her bench has flowers under it. People leave notes, stickers, friendship bracelets. One day someone left a small plastic bee. I took that one home. Here's your aging wisdom. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering with less fear. One Saturday, Jensen called. "We're closing the investigation." I didn't say anything at first. "I don't mean we're forgetting," he added, "just that the evidence trail has reached its limit for now." I understood. It had been coming. "There's one thing we wanted to offer," he said. "We're creating a digital archive. Testimonies, timelines, personal stories, a place people can visit, learn, remember." I was quiet. Then asked, "Can we call it Echo Field?" He hesitated. That's the name of the new park, isn't it? Yeah. But parks grow grass. Archives grow truth. He agreed. Audrey recorded her testimony 2 weeks later. She sat in a soundproof room with warm lighting and a glass of water she never touched. I watched from behind the glass Helen by my side. Her voice was steady. Her story was exact. She named people, places, feelings. She didn't cry. But when she finished, she looked directly into the camera and said I was gone. But I'm not lost. Here's your academic phrase for today: reclaimed narrative space. It's what happens when survivors tell their own story on their terms without asking permission. I recorded mine a few days later. I didn't try to be composed. I cried, I laughed. I read one of Rory's old poems, Ode to Uncrustables, and talked about the time she tried to adopt a worm from the backyard and named it Kevin. I said her name more times than I ever had on record. It felt like planting seeds, because that's what we were doing now. Planting. There's your quirky fact: redwood trees have shallow roots, but they intertwine with the roots of other redwoods. That's how they stay standing for centuries. They hold each other up. Audrey started volunteering with outreach teams. She visits shelters, reads to kids, listens when they talk. She told me once, I'm not trying to erase what happened. I'm trying to make sure someone else gets a better after. I think Rory would have liked that. I think she'd have wanted that too. Sometimes I hear her voice in the kitchen, imagining, of course, but clear, Mom, you're being too dramatic. Go outside, touch some grass. So I do. One afternoon, I sat on her bench, the plastic bee in my hand, and I watched a little girl ride her bike in circles nearby. Her dad cheered each lap like she was winning a gold medal. The girl turned toward me as she coasted by and smiled. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was on the outside of the world. I felt woven in, like I belonged to it again. Here's your final aging wisdom. When grief ends, love doesn't. It just changes jobs. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. I still keep the photo by the window. The one of Rory in her Halloween costume, dressed as a galaxy witch, a last-minute creation involving glitter stars, and a kitchen colander she insisted was a helmet. Her grin is crooked. There's frosting on her sleeve. And behind her, barely in frame, I can see the porch light flickering like it always did. It's funny what you remember. Not the big things are always, but the bits. The way her footsteps sounded on the stairs. The smell of her shampoo. How she used to hum to herself when doing math homework, as if numbers had rhythm. I don't visit the cemetery much anymore. Not because I've forgotten, but because memory doesn't live there. It lives in the way I set the table for one, but still leaves space across from me. In the way I buy raspberry jam, even though I prefer strawberry because it was her favorite, and in the way I still pause at every school bus that rolls past just to make sure the faces are all still looking forward. Some days are heavier than others, but most are just days, worn, quiet, and full of the kind of breath you don't notice unless you've held it for years. This isn't a happy ending, but it is an ending. And endings, I've learned, don't mean something's gone. They mean something was here. So tonight, if you're holding on to something, grief, guilt, a name you whisper just before sleep, know this: you're not alone. We lose people, but we also find them again in echoes, in drawings, in stories, in each other. So rest now. The darkness is still out there, but so are we, and we are louder than the silence.